Once Jang finished meditating, he stood up, approached the wall, and using the divine elephant fist began to punch the wall, creating shockwaves. His punches were so strong that Zai Xuanyu and the others raised their arms in front of their faces. Almost all members of the group were injured and very tired. Zai Xuanyu opened her eyes and quickly realized that the force of the impacts was too strong. She began observing Jang and with a serious expression asked everyone to step back a little, otherwise they would end up dead due to the impacts. Several seconds passed, and Jang kept punching. He was not willing to give up, so he adopted an offensive stance and struck again. This time, the wall of flesh started breaking apart. A hole formed in the wall, and Jang told everyone to take advantage now to escape from inside it. But at that moment, the wound began healing itself. The speed of regeneration was too fast, leaving no time for escape. Upon seeing this, the eyes of our boy filled with determination. He clenched his fist tightly and it began to emit poisonous mist. He asked Little Nine for help. He wanted her to summon a couple of insects to create an explosion. Using the insects and Xiao Jia's power, Jiang struck again, now creating a small explosion. He managed to open another hole in the wall, but the corpse quickly healed itself. Zai Xuanyu couldn't help but clench her teeth tightly. With a gaze full of fear, her attention was fixed on the wall. The explosion had created small cracks in the wall, but the wounds healed immediately and no one knew why. Jiang thought about giving up, but just then, the wall started to break. Seeing this, our boy's mind filled with confusion. He didn't know what was happening. At that moment, someone broke the wall from the outside, leaving Jiang and the others in shock. Once the curtain of smoke disappeared, Gu Kaishan and Zai Xuanyu's great-grandfather could be seen standing in front of the opening. The great-grandfather looked somewhat tired while on the other hand Gu Kaishan seemed unaffected. They were the ones who had broken through the wall from outside. Zai Xuanyu's great-grandfather stood up and extended his hand to one side, giving everyone an order to leave the corpse. Seeing Salvation's light, all members of the group including Hua Yunfei ran out with all their strength. Upon exiting, some collapsed to the ground due to exhaustion. Gu Kaishan, who was standing nearby, couldn't help but wonder where Zai Xuanyu and Jiang were. While 3 members of the group were leaving the corpse through the gap, Jiang and Zai Xuanyu were still inside, and the wound was already beginning to heal. She panicked, placed her hand on our boy's shoulder, and decided it was time to leave this place. She entered the gap to go outside, and the wound began to heal quickly. Zai Xuanyu grabbed Jiang by the shoulder and with a confused and worried expression asked him to come with her. But Jiang turned his back on her and explained that the gap was no longer wide enough for 2 people to fit through, asking her to go first. His eyes were full of confusion as he didn't understand why women were always problematic at moments like this. Jiang started moving away, and Zai Xuanyu's mind filled with despair. She panicked and decided to stay with him and find another way out of the corpse. But Jiang used a technique called Growth of All Things and summoned some roots which wrapped around her body. He wanted her to leave this place. The roots began to expel her body outward, and while the wound was slowly healing, she extended her hand toward him in a desperate attempt, asking him to stop, but it was already too late. The roots expelled her body outside, causing her to fall to the ground. Now the wall was almost sealed again. The father, somewhat worried, started walking toward his daughter, and Gu Kaishan and the grandfather who were beside him quickly realized that Jiang had not come out and the wall had already sealed itself again. Zai Xuanyu fell to her knees on the ground. The father approached her and grabbed her by the wrists. He couldn't help but start crying and feel relieved upon seeing that she was okay. She began crying as well, and desperation consumed her mind since Jiang Chen was still trapped inside the corpse. She wanted her father to save him. He asked his daughter not to worry since as long as Jiang and her great-grandfather cooperated and attacked from inside and outside once again, he was sure he would be able to get out. The grandfather's body began to emit a powerful blue energy. He unsheathed the sword, and with a serene expression, asked Gu Kaishan to prepare to attack again. Gu Kaishan also unsheathed his sword, started staring at the wall, and said there was no need to say it. They prepared to attack, but just then, veins appeared around the tomb, and it began to emit a malignant energy. Seeing this, they quickly realized that the defense of the ancient god's corpse had strengthened. The grandfather revealed that the defense was not passive, but active. Upon hearing this, Gu Kaishan's mind filled with confusion. He began observing the energy and asked for an explanation. The grandfather explained that inside the ancient god's corpse, something was awakening, something capable of controlling parts of this body's abilities. The grandfather's eyes filled with seriousness. He feared that now it no longer mattered how they cooperated from within or outside the corpse. There was no way to create an opening for Jiang to escape. Gu Kaishin refused to believe this and used all his strength to launch a powerful slash at the tomb, but his attack had no effect. The grandfather put his hands behind his back, turned his back to Gu Kaishin, closed his eyes, and began to walk away, asking him not to waste resources. Now that the corpse of the ancient god had mutated, it was a matter of great importance, and they had to keep watch over it from the outside. If it was discovered that the mutation tended to spread to the outside world, they were to exile the corpse immediately. Gu Kaishin clenched his teeth tightly, and his eyes filled with surprise and rage. He did not know what was happening. Upon hearing this, Xuanyu placed her hands on her face and began crying. The father and a girl who were beside her started comforting her. The grandfather began to move away from them and asked Gu Kaishin not to do anything foolish. He closed his eyes, lowered his head, and could not help but feel angry and desperate, not knowing what to do now or how to save Jang. Hua Yunfei, who had regained consciousness, sat up and began observing the tomb with a worried expression. Everyone was sad to see that Jang had given his life to save them. Jang unsheathed the sword, and his body began emitting a suffocating energy. His mind was being bombarded with thoughts. The first was not fleeing from the corpse but going toward the brain, since there was a great opportunity waiting there. Consumed by these thoughts, he set off toward the brain of the ancient god. Duangsu was watching Jang through the magic ball. His eyes began to shine and filled with joy, making a smile appear on his face. He couldn't believe that the fish had taken the bait. Once Jang reached the brain, he was going to be able to switch bodies, and with Jang's fresh and alive body, he would be able to revive and get out of here. After several minutes, Jang reached the brain and came across a giant stone door with something written on one side. Jang's attention was fixed on the words, which had been made with a sword and were more than 100 years old, but the energy of the sword remained dominant, making his heart tremble. He realized that this was what the god of sword had written for the first time in this place upon entering. Behind this door was the corpse's brain. Using both hands, he opened the door and asked Little Nine and Xiaojia to hide and not come out unless he called them, since they were going to be his ace up the sleeve. Jang entered a hallway, and a strange energy began to emerge, with many whispers starting to resonate. He put his hands on his head and couldn't help but feel pain, not knowing where the whispers were coming from. The whispers became more intense, causing Jang to begin losing composure. He fell to his knees on the ground and couldn't help but get angry. Just then, he appeared in another place, and someone with white hair began to descend from the sky. Jang, who was holding the sword with one hand, raised his head, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but fall into confusion. It was Duangsu. He had been waiting in this place for hundreds of years for Jang to arrive. Upon hearing this, our boy's eyes filled with surprise, and a warm sensation took control of his body. Duangsu began to descend toward him and introduced himself as the ancient god. Jang remained silently observing, not knowing how to act. Duangsu's body began to change and take Jang's form. He started staring at him intently and began to smile. Seeing this, Jang couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Duangsu took Jang's form, approached him, extended his hand, and with a cheerful smile revealed that he was Jang and Jang was him. He wanted both of them to unite into one being. The eyes of our boy filled with surprise. He was in shock, not knowing what to do. But instead of falling into Duangsu's trap, Jang launched a powerful slash, making him move away, revealing that he knew he was pretending to be a god to deceive him. Duangsu showed his true form, caught Jang's attack with his hand and began to smile, his eyes filled with excitement upon seeing that Jang's slash was interesting. He was surprised to see that human martial arts of the new era had reached this level. Jang was somewhat surprised to see that he had caught the sword energy, using his hand. Duangsu broke the energy into pieces, started observing him, and revealed that he no longer had much of his origin energy left. In the blink of an eye, the sky filled with small dragons. Duangsu extended his hand to one side and with an evil smile explained that if Jang's body were not useful, he would have used more terrifying methods to kill him. Jang's mind filled with confusion, not knowing what this guy meant. His attention fixed on the dragons, and it didn't take long for him to realize that these monsters were all at the 6th level of transformation, and there were even some at the 9th level. It was no wonder to him that the sword god had almost died in this place. He knew that even if he released all the offspring, he wouldn't be able to defeat him. He clenched his fist tightly and with a determined look decided to treat this dead god as if he were alive, giving Little Nine, Xiaojia, and all the insects the order to come out. At that moment something happened and Jiang's expression changed. He began to feel fear since he couldn't contact Little Nine or the others. The small dragons trapped Jiang's body, leaving him immobile. Duangsu approached him, began to stare at him intently, and couldn't help but smile. He decided it was time to end this. Jang clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help but feel terror, knowing that this was not good. Duangsu placed his hand on Jiang's shoulder and began to enter his body, causing him to open his mouth and start screaming in agony. With a wicked smile, he told Jang not to worry because he was going to help him live better. But just then, the ancestral tree of all things emerged behind them. Upon feeling this, Duangsu's mind filled with confusion. He didn't know how this thing had entered here. On the tree there was a rainbow-colored fruit, a new fruit never seen before. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.